Will the Falcons' two new defensive coach hires fix their pass rush?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com. RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make it your first listen each and every day. And come in every day, all you do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are talking about the two new defensive assistant coach hires that the Falcons made on Friday. Thankfully, did not wait till Saturday to announce these things and ruin my weekend. And we'll talk about, does this potentially mean that the Falcons are moving towards a 4-3? Will this help develop some of the young defensive players on the roster? We'll get into all of that, but let's start with the news. The Falcons hired two new defensive assistants. That was Mike Rutenberg as their defensive passing game coordinator and Nate Ollie as their D-line coach. We'll talk about Nate Ollie because, we only care about the pass rush and all about trenches on today's episode. And so there were rumors earlier this week that the Falcons were interviewing Ollie, who worked with Jeff Ulbrich in New York, right? This will be Ollie's second full-time stint as a full-time defensive line coach. He previously spent 2 years in 2022 and 2023 with the Indianapolis Colts in that role. And I believe the Colts set a franchise record for 51 sacks in 2023 under Nate Ollie in his second year there. I think this hire does add fuel to the fire that the Falcons may be moving to a 4-3 just because everywhere that Nate Ollie has been, and he's been an NFL assistant for 6 years now, they have run 4-3 teams. It started out in 2019 with the Philadelphia Eagles as assistant D-line coach, spent 2 years there under Jim Schwartz, who's famous for his Y9 pass rushing scheme. We're not going to give Nate Ollie much credit for the Eagles' pass rushing success in those years, just because the Eagles have had a successful pass rush for basically a decade plus. Then he went to New York with Jeff Ulbrich in 2021, where he was also assistant D-line coach there. Went to Indianapolis after that, working under Gus Bradley in 22 and 23. That Gus Bradley defense, much like the Robert Saleh / Jeff Ulbrich defense, likes to rush only 4 guys. I think, if the Jets were dead last in the league in blitz in those years, I'm pretty sure the Colts were second to last in those years. And then Ollie moved to Houston in 2024 as an assistant D-line coach. Houston, of course, had a good pass rush this past year under D'Amico Ryans. It's hard to give Ollie too much credit for, they swapped out Jonathan Grenard and Sheldon Rankins for Daniil Hunter and Denico Autry, two very established pass rushers. But if you want to give him credit for, taking Will Anderson's game to the next level, getting him a double-digit sack season, you can do so. So Ollie was at Tennessee as a graduate assistant during Derek Barnett's time there, who also played with Houston this past year. I'm sure you're going to see in some of the bios about Nate Ollie that, he worked with Derek Barnett in college. And it's like, not really. Barnett was gone when Ollie became an interim D-line coach at the end of the 2017 season. So I'm not sure what we would give him. So when we're looking at Nate Ollie's resume, I think we're really focused on his time in Indianapolis, right? You saw DeForest Buckner there, obviously an established player, but was very productive during his time there. There was a decline from Buckner this past year without Nate Ollie in Indianapolis, although you wonder if that's just, being on the wrong side of 30 at this point in time, just natural decline. But, if you want to, push a narrative, you can certainly try it with that. Kwity Paye didn't quite hit the level of development. They drafted Kwity Paye in 21 before Ollie got there. And over the next 2 years, you just didn't really see a big uptick in production from Kwity Paye. That's a big reason why they drafted Laiatu Latu this past year to sort of be that sort of alpha edge rusher that they were lacking. But the two players that you could probably make the most compelling case that did develop under Nate Ollie in Indianapolis beyond Quiddy is Deo Odeyingbo and Tyquan Lewis. Tyquan Lewis had a career year in 2023 with 4 sacks and 44 pressures. Deo Odeyingbo has shown steady progression each year he's been in Indianapolis, and I think he had his career year this past year, but there was steady uptick in production from 21 to 22 under Nate Ollie, then 22 to 23, and then again that natural progression continuing in 2024 for Deo Odeyingbo, who's now a free agent. And maybe the Falcons will be in pursuit of him, especially if the Falcons are looking to move to more of a 4-3. But when we look at sort of Kwity Paye's lack of development, but Deo Odeyingbo's and Tyquan Lewis's development, there's clearly a type that Nate Ollie seems to be able to be effective working with. It's those big, long edges that can also rush from the inside. Those guys had a lot more success with Nate Ollie in Indianapolis than the quote-unquote true edge in Kwity Paye. And so that's good news if you're on Zach Harrison hive, I think, because Zach Harrison kind of fits that description in that terms of pass rusher. And so maybe Nate Ollie will be able to allow Zach Harrison to take that next jump and leap at the same time in 2025. And Zach Harrison, for me personally, is the guy that I'm most excited to see where he's going to be in 2025 among the young defensive linemen that aren't named Arnold Ebiketie in this group. So I think this is a positive sign in that regard. We'll talk a little bit more about defensive passing game coordinator Mike Rutenberg as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So it's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to get the most out of these final weeks of football action, and Prize Picks is going to help you do that. And they're the place for you if you want a chance to win real money while you're watching football, right? Prize Picks is simple. All you got to do is pick more or less on their stat projections. It's easy. You don't have to worry about going up against other people. It's just you versus the stats, and you just say more or less on how many passing yards, rushing yards, touchdowns guys are going to play, and you will have a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear people are loving this platform. They're going to love it even more this weekend, because guess what? You're going to get a free pick this weekend for the NFC Championship game. All Jaden Daniels needs is 1 passing yard, and you'll get a win in that regard. So, see what else you want to add to that total. You're right. They're just giving you a free pick right there. So download the Prize Pick app today, take advantage of that offer, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly as well. After you play your first $5 line, use that code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly. After you play your first $5, Prize Picks, run your game. So Mike Rutenberg is the Falcons' new defensive passing game coordinator. What that role exactly is, we'll find out. But, usually that's the guy that's dealing with sort of helping the defensive coordinator and focusing on the passing game. And there's a run game coordinator, all that stuff. So, Rutenberg spent the last 4 years with the New York Jets, obviously with Jeff Ulbrich as the Jets linebackers coach. And when we talk about the development of guys under Mike Rutenberg, there's much more clear-cut evidence that Mike Rutenberg had a lot of impact on the positive development of some of these young players, rather than what we're talking about sort of nebulously with Nate Ollie and whatnot. And so, I think Rutenberg deserves a ton of credit for elevating Quincy Williams, who was kind of, considered a kind of a bust in Jacksonville, got to New York in 2021 with Rutenberg, and then slowly became an impact player to the point that he was an all-pro in 2023. You also look at the development of Jamian Sherwood, who was a college safety that turned into a pretty effective linebacker. Started this past year as an injury replacement for CJ Mosley, and by all accounts handled himself very well in that role. It was voted the team MVP by his teammates this past year. He's also headed to free agency as well. So maybe somebody on the Falcons radar when it comes to signing a free agent to plug and play next to Caden Ellis, where Sherwood, because of that safety pass, tends to be a more effective coverage linebacker and whatnot, although I'm sure the Jets will prioritize re-signing him. So we'll see on that front. But, those two feathers in Mike Rutenberg's hat, to me alone kind of suggests that Mike Rutenberg is a better linebacker coach than Jeff Ulbrich, right? the Falcons' new defensive coordinator, right? When you compare the lack of development, the lack of growth that you saw while Jeff Ulbrich was, linebacker coach here in Atlanta from guys like Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell and Duke Riley. And, it's probably not fair. I think Deion Jones did develop. He did get better and improve over time in Atlanta. Campbell, not so much. I felt like, there was a stretch in 2018 where I thought Campbell looked pretty good, but very inconsistent. And you saw some decline in subsequent years. And so that's one of the reasons why you may have heard me on previous episodes talk about, why I wasn't necessarily a huge Jeff Ulbrich advocate in terms of his development of some of those linebackers. Foye Oluokun, to me, was the one guy that did develop under him. And when I look at, I've explained this before on the podcast, I think I used this to contrast Dwayne Ledford. And when in what he did in 2022, when like every offensive, 80% of the Falcons offensive linemen under Dwayne Ledford in that season had success or had career years or whatever you want to call it. That to me tells me that the coaching is good. And with Jeff Ulbrich, when you have only like 1 out of 4 guys that, have success, that tells me that that individual player is good, not necessarily that the coaching is good. So that's kind of how I sort of view it. And so I've always been a little more skeptical of Jeff Ulbrich as a coach than other folks. And so to me, looking at Mike Rutenberg's resume, seems to me that, with Quincy Williams and with Jamie and Sherwood, he's done a pretty heck of a good job in New York. But again, what is his role as a defensive pass game coordinator? He's probably not going to be coaching the linebackers. That's Barrett Ruud's job. But he'll obviously be helping Ulbrich and Morris with their game plans, focusing on the passing attack, which again seems odd for a linebackers coach, but Rutenberg did serve as an assistant DBs coach for a couple of seasons with Jacksonville from 2013 to 2015 at the start of his NFL coaching career that overlapped with Robert Saleh's time in Jacksonville when Gus Bradley was the head coach there. Rutenberg then stuck around in Jacksonville when Doug Marrone took over for Gus Bradley, then joined Saleh in San Francisco in 2020 before joining Saleh and ultimately Ulbrich in New York in 2021. So, this move to me, if Mike Rutenberg will not be directly coaching the linebackers, but having another capable linebacker coach in the building, helping with the game plans and whatnot, if you're like me and you still hold out a sliver of a hope, right? You're the anti-Jarvis Davis and you still hold out some hope that Troy Anderson is going to put together a breakout year in his final rookie season, the final season of his rookie contract in 2025, then you like the Mike Rutenberg hire, right? And you're like, oh, okay, well, you pass game coordinator, linebacker coach. Okay, let's see what Troy can do if he can finally put it together, stay healthy, and be an impactful player. Obviously, as Jarvis has indicated, and I would echo these sentiments. I don't know if the Falcons can rely on Troy Anderson to have that breakout season. They've tried that the last 2 years. It hasn't worked. And so, third time may be a charm, but I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. So we'll see what the Falcons do at the linebacker position to upgrade that spot. But again, I think both of these hires, are indicators that some of these young guys on defense, might be in store for having the sort of, breakout years that we've been hoping to see from them for the last couple of years. And that will get us into a deeper conversation about the breakout potential of some of these young guys, as well as talking a little bit more about, whether or not the Falcons will make that, scheme shift from a 3-4 to a 4-3. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So everyone wants to start the new year strong. And, one of the ways that you can start it strong is by going to more live events like sports, comedy, and music and theater. And whatever event is near you, Game Time is going to make it easier to get tickets with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature is going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time is going to offer great seats at unbeatable prices. And what you see is what you get, because in the app, you just toggle on the all-in prices. You don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. You get the panoramic seat view so you can line up the perfect spot at your event to see all the action. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And growing your small business in 2025 comes down to who you hire, how well you hire. And LinkedIn is going to help you find the right pieces, the right faces for your new defensive identity or your small business's new identity, like the Atlanta Falcons are hiring new defensive coaches. And LinkedIn's going to give you the data that you need to find the people with the right skills, interests, and connections that you all share, right? To find that right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn is going to has helped them find high quality candidates. And so hire smarter this year. Find your next great hire with LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So a big part of this hopeful defensive improvement in 2025, we talked a lot about that. How much is Jeff Ulbrich moving the needle? The Falcons need an infusion of talent. But, another part of that is going to be, internal development from some of these young players, right? That was a big part of the Jets defensive turnaround from 21 to 22 when they went from worst basically to first, right? They got big improvement from a guy like Quinnen Williams and whatnot. So, I don't know if Quinnen Williams is walking through that door, but, all help helps for the Falcons. All help matters, I guess, is what we're saying. So, we've seen growth from some of these young guys on defense, but if, the Falcons are going to take that next leap defensively, that we need to see even more. Right. And so that includes the 2022, 2023, and 2024 draft classes, just focusing primarily on the defense. The same applies to the offense, but we're focusing on the defense today. Whether we're talking about in 2022, Arnold, Ebiketie, D'Angelo Malone, Troy Anderson, basically they're all entering contract years in 2025. So they need to give us a reason to re-sign them, right? AK seems to be on that path. Whether he'll get there, we'll see. But, D'Angelo Malone and Troy Anderson at this point don't appear to be guys that are due for a second contract. And so they need to change the narrative in 2025. You look at the 2023 class, right? You have a lot of optimism or at least I do, for what Zach Harrison can do. I thought he showcased starting level ability despite, playing a backup level of snaps this past year. And I'm expecting him, especially if the Falcons stick with the 3-4, to be a starter at one of those DN spots and take away a lot of the snaps that Grady Jarrett, currently is having. Grady Jarrett's playing like 60+% of the snaps this past year. I feel like that number should be down to like 40%, and a big chunk of those snaps should be going to Zach Harrison, basically make Grady Jarrett a designated pass rusher on the interior as opposed to a full-time starter. And hopefully we'll see, Zach Harrison, instead of playing like the 25% of snaps that he played this past year, that number get up to 40, 50, 60% or whatnot. But, in that 23 class, you also have Clark Phillips. You also have DeMarco Hellams. You want to see what those guys can do, as we discuss with Jarvis Davis, I believe, on yesterday's episode, as many of you are listening to this. Clark and DeMarco are solid role players, but can they be more than that? I'm a little bit more optimistic about Hellams, based off of just what the Falcons need at that strong safety position, someone, that can bring a little bit more physicality than what they're currently getting. I'm not as optimistic about Clark Phillips, but Hellams is coming off an injury, and Clark, did take strides this year, but, you guys know me and my Clark Phillips hatred. It's not hatred, but it's just like, I think he's a limited player, but it is what it is. But looking at the 24 class, you have Ruka Woro, you have Brandon Dolis, you have JD Bertrand. They all flashed at times this year, but we need to see more than flashes in 2025. How big a year two jump will those guys make? And obviously, it's going to be about year one for Braylon Trice because he missed this past year with an injury. Is he going to look good coming off of that injury? That's going to be the question. So, all of these concerns about these recent drafts with the Falcons and not knowing who's good and who's going to impact and who's a difference maker, these all contribute to the narrative surrounding Terry Fontenot being a poor drafter. And he certainly has not drafted a ton of impact players on either side of the ball. And it's certainly true of the defense. It's just a bunch of complimentary starters and role players for the defense at this point in time. And it's not due to a lack of trying. I know there's a narrative that like, oh, the Falcons haven't used premium picks on the defense. No, they just haven't used a first round pick on their defense in the 4 years that Terry Fontenot has been here. 70% of their picks from rounds 2 through 4 have been used on the defense. And if you consider, all picks in the first 4 rounds as premium picks like I do, right? Because those are the rounds that typically you can find, you have at least a decent chance of finding a starter in. Technically the majority of those picks in the first 4 rounds have been defensive. About 56% of them have been defensive picks. So, clearly they've taking a lot of swings. Can't speak English today. Sorry, guys. But they haven't really added a difference maker. There hasn't been that sort of, again, maybe you would say Arnold Ebiketie is a double at this point. Maybe, Zach Harrison's a solid single at this point, and he's leading off. He's cheating towards the steal second or something like that. Again, baseball analogies are tough, but no difference maker is basically the point I'm trying to make. And so there's a lot more pressure, I think, going into this offseason for the Falcons to use that number one pick, that premium pick on a defensive player that can kind of change the narrative and get that sort of difference maker, that instant impact difference maker, and not be a situation where we're going in 2026, 2027 being like, well, we don't really know what, the Falcons 2025 first round pick is he going to be a difference maker? Is he a complimentary starter? Is he more of a role player? All that sort of stuff. So hopefully that will change. That narrative will shift this offseason. But nobody as of yet has, at least on defense, has planted their flag as a guy that you can say, oh, they definitely earned a second contract, right? Again, I feel like AK, Arnold Ebiketie, and Zach Harrison are trending that way, but time will tell on that. And so, with 10 defensive picks on in those rounds, from rounds 2 through 4, if 2 of them earn second contracts, that's a decent hit rate, right? That's similar hit rate in terms of overall hit rate when it comes to Thomas Dimitroff, right? That in terms of retention rate on guys that got second contracts under Thomas Dimitroff, it was about 21.5% overall, counting all rounds. I think that number is a little bit better when you look at the early rounds. But, you look at another team like the Saints, they only have a retention rate of about 20% as well over a similar period of time, and they were more successful, just in case, some of you people are still like, oh, Dimitroff was a terrible drafter. But it does contribute to and reiterate the point I've made dozens of times on this podcast over the years, which is, and it's one of the reasons why I don't criticize Terry Fontenot's drafting to the same degree that other people do, because I think the hit rate on draft picks is probably much lower than the general perception perceives it to be. And that to me is evidence of it, where it's just like, okay, of all your draft picks, 20% of them are going to be re-signed, right? And then again, 2 out of 10 is in the first, couple of rounds is not a great number. You want that number to be higher, but if 2 out of 10 overall is all that you're getting, that's about the norm in the NFL is the point I'm trying to make. So we'll see what's what with this defense, and if these coaching additions will change the narrative of some of these guys in 2025 as they need to, but we'll see on that front. But let's wrap up sort of revisiting whether or not the Falcons are going to be a 4-3 quickly. As I stated yesterday to Jarvis, I feel like 3-4 better fits their personnel. I like Arnold Ebiketie more in a 3-4. I like Zach Harrison now that he's added the weight as more of a 3-4 defensive end. I've always felt like he can play a 4-3 defensive end, but I feel like his best work is more as a 5-tech than a true edge rusher. The same thing goes with Ruka Roro. I think he's a classic 3-4 guy. I think some of your older guys on the roster, like Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata, that you might be, moving on from in the very near future, maybe better suited for that 4-3 sort of defense. But, I don't know if the 4-3 really fits the Falcons personnel. So I'll be curious if they will be moving to that, or they will be sitting there saying, no, we're going to stick with the 3-4, which is what Raheem has been calling the last couple of years for 4 years. Now, obviously, Jeff Ulbrich's experience is primarily in a 4-3 defense as a defensive coordinator in New York, obviously in Atlanta when the Falcons were a 4-3 team. As I've stated before, the Falcons and the Jets, I believe, did run a 4-3 under front, which is kind of a hybrid of the 3-4 and the 4-3 in terms of the way that those defenses are classically run. It's, you put 5 guys in the line of scrimmage pretty consistently. It's just slightly different techniques and whatnot. So we'll see if the Falcons just, decide that we're going to do, I believe it was a Saints game. I talked about this on the pod. I think it was the second Saints game. The Falcons did dabble a little bit with 4-3 looks in that game. It was one of the few games that Troy Anderson was healthy. And so I think Troy played in that second Saints game. But I don't know. Maybe it was a Chargers game. It was a home game. I do remember that. So I guess it wasn't the second Saints game. It was indoors, I should say. That's probably more accurate. I do remember it being on turf. But anyway, so we'll see if the Falcons go further down that road, right? They'll introduce Jeff Ulbrich as the new defensive coordinator on Monday. And I'm sure we'll get a question about Jeff Ulbrich. What, is he going to stick with the 3-4? Is he going to move to the 4-3? I'm sure that will be one of the first of 3 questions that D-Led is going to lob at Jeff Ulbrich to start off the presser. So we'll probably have an answer on Monday about whether or not the Falcons are going to switch the scheme. Hopefully we'll have an answer rather than just like, oh, we'll figure it out later. And like, all right, like it's almost February. Like you're still figuring out stuff, like figuring out who you're going to sign in free agency. That's something you figure out later. What your scheme is going to be. I hope you have that figured out by the time we get to the February 1st, but we'll see on that front. So those are my thoughts on the 2 new hires. We'll have more talking about the Falcons offensive line. So you're getting much more content this week than initially I thought you guys would get because of the coaching changes and doing the positional review. So we still got one of those coming your way, the offensive line breakdown. We'll be talking about, the case for and against re-signing Drew Dalman. We'll give some love and appreciation for the Falcons offensive line, but we'll also spend quite a bit of time talking about diversifying the run game. So that's all in store for you if you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen as an everyday, and you can do so by checking us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, if you want to get the scoop on this weekend's action with the conference championship games, Locked On NFL is going to have you covered. You want to catch all the drama that's going on with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Jacksonville Jaguars, in addition to Locked On Bucs and Locked On Jags, Locked On NFL is going to have you, sort of the big picture stuff with all the biggest stories around the NFL with all these coaching changes and all that stuff. So check it all out, guys, as you can. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.